going live? She's going live?
I am right now. There we go.
Good evening, welcome to tonight's Board of Ed meeting, it's June 15th, 2021.
Jim Barrett,
Here.
Sherry Harker, Al Close.
Here.
Steve Link, Megan Michael. Here. Kathy Nice. Here. Tom Ackley.
Stand for the pledge. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, do you have anything to add to the agenda? Motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And then we need to appoint a secretary for tonight's meeting, let's see.
I nominate Jim Barrett.
I should open my mouth.
He's sitting right there.
Second for Megan, all those in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, first up we have.
Work here.
Yeah.
You
just have to be here. First up, consent approval for the minutes of the May 25th Board of Ed meeting and May 25th Board of Ed closed session. That's
moved.
2021.
Second. Yeah, that should be 21. Al Close.
Yes.
Megan Michael.
Yes.
Kathy Nice. Yes. Jim Barrett.
Yes.
Next up, agenda time for citizens to speak. Anyone like to address the board?
Hi, I'm Nancy Thompson. So I was looking at the agenda and I see that there's a COVID-19 update, so again, not knowing what's gonna be covered, I'd like to use this time just to find out where the district is, where the board is, where administration is, with, where things stand right now with masks in school for the fall.
Okay, you're there in about 2 minutes.
I would like to, this is not a two-way dialogue, I understand, so I don't know if the board or or administration would entertain possibly doing a focus group with parents and getting some feedback or some thoughts from the parents. I'm exhausted with this conversation. I'm exhausted with what's happened the last 2 years. I'm sick to my stomach to think that my kids might have to wear masks in the fall. And I want to know what our district and our board is doing to support that.
Anyone else want to speak as a citizen? Okay, move on to act on the bills.
So you'll note that we're wrapping up our bills for the year. Included in our explanation of those, you'll see that we did a couple projects related to lighting at the high school as well as transportation. In looking at our operational budget, we found that we had a little bit of wiggle room to be able to pull out some of those things, primarily related to securities. We wanted to get moving on them. Also included, you'll see that there are some expenditures related to our title funds, so we're just expending those out for the year as well. That's about it.
I just had a question, and I'm assuming it's tuition for Henry?
The itinerant services.
Okay,
that's
so it's like
correct.
an outplacement,
Correct.
goes
Yeah.
there, okay.
Is it that or is it, or the vision itinerant?
Oh, it's
Possibly.
an itinerant, yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. So they come into the.
Right, so
different
McHenry
services.
School District has hired the vision itinerant, and then we purchase services from McHenry School District for her to come here and work with our kids with low vision.
So rather than,
Okay.
yeah,
But
so
it's still
rather than
considered-
hiring our own vision itinerant person,
Okay.
we use the services. So, obviously, that's the entire bill for the whole year, so rather than having our own person, we use it.
Yeah.
Yep. But
Is
yeah,
this
so that's what comes out
First
with.
time we've done that?
No,
Oh.
no, but it just wanted to note it, so
Okay.
obviously those are services that some of our students need.
Yeah.
And rather than trying to have our own staff, it's better to partner with other districts.
Sure.
Cost savings that way.
Any other questions from anyone else for Anne? Motion to pay the bills?
Make a motion to pay the bills as presented.
Second. Megan Michael?
Yes.
Kathy Nice? Yes. Jim Barrett?
Yes.
Al Close?
Yes. First up under informational items, COVID-19 update.
Yes, just thought I'd throw some information out. We continue to meet with the health department and county suits twice a week with the health department, once a week with the We know that the state moved to phase 5, but that hasn't done a lot for the schools at this point in time. So there's quite a few things that are concerning for schools at this point in time. First of all, we talked about remote learning, and it looks like remote learning will only need to be required for those that are not eligible and considered a close contact. So they're only under 12 and considered a close contact. So it should be primarily primary students at this point in time for remote learning. So that's the preliminary information that we've gotten from ISBE and the state at this point in time. It's only June 15th, that's liable to change. A lot has been pushed out in regards to testing. There's a significant push, not about mandatory testing, but it's about voluntary testing, really 2 types of testing. One's a saliva test and one's a Finex test out of Abbott. The direction seems to be, and nothing has been official, but you kind of get the sense of how things are blowing in the wind a little bit, that students can test out of quarantine or get close contacts reduced, or not necessarily, I don't want to use the term ignored, but I'm going to use that term right now, if there's a testing plan or a testing system in place. Whether it's a Finex, which is if you come down to the office and that's symptomatic and then you test negative, you can go back to the office. The other one's a saliva test, which I think you've heard me talk about before. It's a spit in the vial, it's a once a week voluntary thing. So there seems to be a lot of push with that in both close contacts and also monitoring what's happening with COVID. There is a big hot topic, Nancy, I'll touch base right with what you're talking about is what's going to happen with masks and what's going to happen with masks in the fall. As of today, on June 15th, pre-K through 12 is, right now the state's requiring that, but it's also June 15th and there's a long way to go before that. I think I've talked to the board a couple of times. I feel like the state's kind of gotten everything else going and now they're going to come back, I feel like after the 4th of July to kind of revisit with what schools are doing and what's going to happen. People did talk about, we've had 2 webinars and 2 conferences with the state, ISBE and IDPH in regards to what their plans are, and a couple of districts have said, all right, what if we ignore it and just go our own way without the mask? They talked about that they're looking at if the mask, I think they made an emphasis to point, if the mask mandate stays, then they would look at different ways to be able to penalize the district, whether it's financially or other areas. And so,
If they chose to
If they
go
chose to.
against it.
correct, right. So, but that's at this point in time, and that's at June 15th. There's a lot that's gonna change between now and then. So there's no specifics at this point yet. It's the same, every superintendent I've talked to is having the same discussions in their community, and the intention of that will be a hot topic. We also anticipate things are gonna change because of what's happening, right? The numbers are going so low. The question is exactly what Nancy talked about was, how are we gonna do that anymore? So,
Right.
there is pressure being put on. I know my professional organization that I belong to, that I used to be on the board with, IESA, is putting pressure on. I know the Principal Association is, I know there's a lot of associated, and we as county superintendents are working with the health department, had a meeting with the state, they came and they talked to us about it as well, so we're trying to put some pressure on them. But there's gonna be a lot more pressure that comes as it moves further along. So vaccines continue to be the major focus as well. There may be a potential that we ask families if their child has been vaccinated to share if they've gotten vaccinated, so we have that on record. So if something does happen where they would be quote unquote considered a close contact, if we follow the current guidelines as they are, then they wouldn't have to quarantine and things along that line. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of gray right now. It smells a lot like they're trying to get Chicago out by mid, I think it's June 23rd. And then once that gets done, I think there'll be more guidance coming out. So we still need, school districts still need guidance on space capacities. That still hasn't changed. We still need guidance on close contacts. Can we be inside of 3 feet? Can a close contact be inside of 6 feet? Can they be at 3 feet? That's where the testing is coming in. We still have to get cafeteria spacing because right now we're still required to be at 6 feet at eating, and that, for us, it's not necessarily a huge issue other than our Ringwood. And we can meet everybody, but it's still, as judging tonight, it's still a space issue because you're gonna choose a gym space. But the real big one that does impact us because of how Indian Town work with our buses, but it's still a big issue, the bus capacity is still at 50, and that's to change that. A lot of districts need it to be well over 50 to be able to transport kids, so, there's a lot that needs to be answered. It's not there yet, so.
But as like you said, the pressure is on, because when you open the state to full capacity everywhere with no mask policies other than if you want to wear them and if you're not vaccinated according to what they're saying, and then they completely ignore the school districts in our entire state. I mean, this is just in the Johnsburg thing, you know, we're talking about in our entire state. I mean, the pressure has gotta be enormous to them, so.
But like I said, I do anticipate it more after the fourth. I think they wanna get everybody out, and then I'm anticipating more after the fourth. Otherwise, it's gonna be very complex, and some very unhappy folks. And I don't wanna give my guess one way or the other, so say where it's at, you know.
This might be premature asking, but I'm sure you guys are having conversations. So the remote learning recommendations from the state. So your 12 and older students that have the availability to be vaccinated, if they end up having to quarantine,
They do not have to be offered the remote learning option, but that's where we have to work with how to support the kids.
so do we have a plan for
That's what
that?
the rest of the summer is gonna be,
So it's not.
Because we're
it's
anticipating
not
next-
like 10 days of sick days that they're going to have to, like with no school contact per se?
I'm not gonna say that.
It's a little premature, but curious.
Just because we're not anticipating that there's potential and the likelihood that could change. So we're waiting a little bit of time before, and then we'll,
Then we'll
Yeah.
start nailing down the plans.
Yep. And I have to work with the JTO in regards to that as well. So. There you
Any
go.
questions about?
And if by the next meeting, there are more updates for COVID related to, I'm concerned with the idea that you mentioned penalties for going against it. Could we have more information about specifically what we're talking about for that?
It was nothing specific, it was like, well, we're considering looking at things to be able to be potentially financial considerations and things like, it was nothing like, here's what it would be. Which, because there's nothing like that, it's pretty clear that they haven't made up their mind yet.
Okay.
So, oh yeah, like, I would have it all delineated out that that would be required, this is what the consequences would be.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you. Anything else for Dan? Next informational item, Johnsburg Junior High schedule.
Allie, I don't know if you.
I'm like right in,
I mean, you can stay there.
I'm gonna go this way.
It's gonna be difficult for you to watch. Is that full screen enough? So just wanna give, oh, jeez. All right, there we go. Just wanna give an update on where we're at with the schedule. A lot of this stuff is gonna be review. We've kept the board updated as the process has been going on. But obviously, this started with concerns with the previous schedule, the main one being that core classes were not equal. We also had the issue of trying to provide tier 2 and 3 interventions during, I'm reading the slides, and I'm not gonna do that. So you guys go ahead and take a look at the slides, and then I have some points that I'll add once you've had a minute to just look it over and digest it. So I think one of the questions that came out of this whole process was, why did we change the schedule from what it was in Carrie's in my first year? 60-minute core classes to the 80-40. And one of the main issues, well, there are a couple issues with that. One of the main issues was we weren't able to provide kids interventions without pulling them out of their exploratory classes. So we're pulling 10-15% of kids out of their exploratory classes, so they're missing that experience for one thing. For another thing, because they were missing a class, best practice is you monitor kids' progress every 4 weeks, and if they make progress, then they exit. But because we were pulling them out of class, they missed 4 weeks of Spanish. Even if they make the progress, we couldn't then say, okay, you're gonna go to Spanish for 5 weeks, because they missed the first 4, so they'd be out for the whole quarter. So it wasn't the best way to deliver the interventions, and it was kind of seen by the kids as a punishment, because they're being pulled out for an entire quarter, and they're missing out on classes that they enjoy. We couldn't do the interventions during study hall because it's a duty for the contract, so it's only supervisory. We can't require teachers to provide instruction. So we switched the schedule to try and provide tier 2 and 3 intervention time during our ELA math class by lengthening those classes. Obviously, that had the adverse effect of shortening science and social studies. So the other issue that we've had is that band was before school when we first got here. So we wanted that to be during the day because kids were having to choose if they wanted to get on a bus at 6 a.m. in order to participate in band. So that was something that was, deterring kids from participating in those. We wanted it to be part of the day. So, the solution is to have that during study hall. Obviously, this year, concerns were raised about the core classes not being equal, which brings us to the current day. There we go. So, there are concerns from the community, there are concerns from staff. So we reviewed the schedule. We formed a schedule committee that was representative of all departments and grade levels. And the first thing we did is we outlined a set of criteria that we wanted our schedules to provide for us. You can see what some of those criteria are there. And then we looked at a variety of schedules and saw how many of these check the boxes. And I mentioned previously, we ended on Schedule L. So I don't know what number in the alphabet it is, but it's a lot. So we looked at a lot of different schedules, is the bottom line. And while still trying to make sure that we're able to meet, provide intervention minutes and IEP minutes, address kids' SEL needs, make sure that band and choir are still within the day. So we looked at a variety of schedules through the schedule committee. Once we found one that checked all the boxes, we then had the leadership committee look over it as well to give additional feedback and suggestions. And then finally, obviously, had the JTO review it to see if they had any feedback. At that point, the original schedule did not meet the contractual expectation of 30-minute duty-free lunch, so we had to make some tweaks. But we were able to make those tweaks and have it be in line with the contract, which brings us to the proposed schedule. So with the schedule, we have 50-minute core classes. So all 4 ELA math, science, and social studies are all 50 minutes. PE and exploratory are 50 minutes as well. And go ahead.
Is that an increase, PE and exploratory?
It is, yes. So PE and exploratory have been 40 minutes up to this point. So now it's gone from 40 to 50, that's correct now.
Thank you.
So this is the proposed schedule with every student getting a 30-minute lunch, obviously, and then 2 30-minute study hall blocks. But those blocks are going to be very flexible. We can use them in a variety of ways. Band and choir will come out of there, interventions will come out of there. We may do some social emotional learning and providing IEP minutes during that time. The benefit to it being a study hall and not an academic class is that the kids aren't missing the academic class as well. So, research shows that if you want to catch a kid up, you can't replace what they're getting with something else. You can't just say, I'm going to give them different reading. We need to give them more reading than they're getting. So in this model, they're getting the 50-minute reading class, just as an example, and then they're also getting intervention time to help close those gaps. Do you have any questions about the structure before I kind of go into specifics about it.
So how fewer, the amount of time the ELA had and has now, what's the difference?
ELA and math were 82 minutes,
82 minutes? And science and social studies were,
40 minutes.
okay.
If I go back, we tried a couple of, how do I go back, Annie? There we go. I hate Max. One more. So we tried a variety of things to balance out the science and social studies having less instructional minutes over the course of a quarter, semester, year. The first year that we did this, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science and social studies were 40 minutes each. And 8th grade science and social studies teachers came to me 3 or 4 weeks into quarter one and said, can we pilot doing an A-B day so that we have longer blocks of time every other day? So for 8th grade, just because of the number of sections, we had 6 sections at that time, so it worked out, but it didn't affect the other grades. And so Mr. Reinhardt and Mr. Beschel were able to have 82-minute blocks, same as the ELA and math classes, and then same groups of kids, flip-flop them every other day. So it's still less instructional time, but it's longer blocks so that they can do labs, so that they can do projects and things like that. But ultimately, still less instructional.
Right,
Still the same
So-
overall minutes.
right.
Yeah.
But ELA is so heavy, standard. So can science and social studies pick up on some of those, standards that need to be hit?
Potentially, and I
That's what we
think,
do in the lower grades.
sure, yeah, I mean, I think, reading and writing obviously are very important, but also reading and writing in science and social studies is different. So there will be more of that. But additionally, we do have the ISB released priority standards now, so they've pared down some of the standards in all subjects. So one of the things we're gonna have to do this summer is pare down some of that ELA curriculum in response to the priority standards.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, also they can be addressed.
Because that'll be tough.
Right. Any other questions about the structure? Minutes or anything like that? So, for the students, you can see the benefits there, and even though I always tend to start doing it, I'm gonna stop myself from reading you the slides. The main thing there is that all of the academic class periods are equal length. The study hall time allows us a lot of flexibility for a variety of services that need to be provided, band and choir being within the day. Band students now will also get a study hall. One of the unintended negatives of having band and choir being during study hall is, well, now you have to choose. So now they'll also be able to have a study hall. In the middle of the day as well, I've talked to Mr. Galacy about this, because it's study hall, study hall, study hall for each grade level. He's talked about, being able to be flexible, and maybe I'm gonna do a 6 through 8 band performance, so they're each, most days, practicing individually, but now, because that 90-minute time in the middle is common, now we can bring them all together for a whole band rehearsal prior to a performance, just as an example. One of the challenges of having basically different bell schedules, different class lengths, was having kind of mixing of grades at some times, and band was one of those issues where Mr. Galacy wants to pull 6th through 8th grade trumpets. Well, it doesn't work out with 7th grade because of pulling them out of the class, so now that there's that common time, even with the academic periods, then he can do some lessons, so he can better combine kids based on either instrument group or based on ability. There will be some smaller class sizes, just because there's more sections of some of our classes.
Can you expand on that,
So,
what did we go from and to?
right, without the, it's not uniform across the board. So, let me go back.
You're repeat your question, Val? I think
I was just wanted him to expand how he said more, smaller class sizes, just based on an increase in
So the
sections.
previous schedule had five sections of ELA or 5 sections of science, and then your group of 120 kids were split between those 5. Because we've now moved away from grouping them by grade level only.
Okay,
So
that's
it's a
kind of
little
what
bit
I,
more cross. We were able to go, I believe our highest is 7 sections now. So there might be 5, there might be 6, there might be 7, it just depended on how it worked out in the schedule. I know Chris has been tweaking it this week as well. But if you went from 5 sections to 7 sections and you still have 120 kids, you're at some points you have lower amounts of kids in a class setting.
And what this schedule doesn't show, because it's just a student schedule,
Right.
is that while students have 4 cores, PE and exploratory, for a teacher, they're gonna have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 core classes. So, just as an example, I've got a 6th grade social studies teacher who has 4 6th grade social studies classes. Maybe this 5th class, rather than the team plan time, they pick up a 7th grade social studies class. So when you multiply that out with all of the staff, they're all adding additional core classes that they're teaching, which is gonna increase the sections, and like Fran said, lower the numbers. Does that make sense?
not totally, no.
Definitely a visual, I'll tell you.
Cause like in my mind, I'm like, well, you're still separating 6th grade into 4.
groups.
Not, cause that 5th is a 7th grade, so your sections in 6th grade aren't going to
But
be
there
any
could
smaller.
potentially, in, let's say, first hour, you could have a 6th grade ELA taught by one teacher and a 6th grade ELA taught by a different teacher now. Whereas previously, there was only
Gotcha,
this
okay,
ELA teacher.
Okay, gotcha, that makes more sense.
Can you utilize your
Right.
staff better, basically.
So, yeah, there's more teachers teaching in multiple grade levels, so they're picking up those additional sections.
So this is more like, I know when we first moved in the district, it was a schedule similar to this, more of the junior high model, but they also had some grade mixing in certain classes.
Spanish.
We did
Ah.
previously, yes.
Yes,
Years
previously.
ago, I think Dan
Years ago,
I and
we
Kathy were
Yours
the
like,
only ones.
yeah, is that something that this schedule is doing or no?
When we looked at that with the schedule committee and with the representation from all the groups, we're not ready to make that leap with PE and exploratory. It could happen with some of our math classes. So just as an example, we have 6th grade pre-algebra classes and 7th grade pre-algebra classes. So we could potentially have a 6-7 mix pre-algebra or a 7-8 mix algebra. But right now, well, and I guess there's some possible special ed crossover with multi-grade students that all have similar goals in
Right.
reading as an example. So there's some of that as a possibility as well. But not a lot,
Sure.
not at this time anyway.
But it provides that flexibility for down the road.
Jim, did you have a question? Okay, just clearing the throat. Got it. It sounded like you were ready for something. I was.
No, actually, I think it was a phone buzzing. Annie.
I'm sorry. You know what, let me back up. Can everyone please silence your phone?
Yeah.
For the duration of this presentation. Here, I'll leave off. So then, as has been mentioned, this is similar to the high school bell schedule. And one of the differences is that the high school has a common PLC time in the morning, so that's something that we could look at down the road. But we have the challenge of, students not being able to drive themselves to school, so. Unless we hold them back a couple of times. And then so for the teacher schedule, Val, to your point, each teacher will have 5 classes, and then a duty period, and then a 30-minute duty-free lunch, and then the 15-minute plan period. So this is jumping down a little bit, but they'll have 250 to 300 minutes of plan time weekly. With the PE and exploratory teachers, their plan time will be in the middle when those study halls and lunches are meeting. And then for the PE teachers And for our health teacher who also picks up an adaptive PE section, they will need to be paid a 6-period stipend. Getting creative with the exploratory teachers so that they're only teaching 5 sections at a time, which we've been doing for a couple years now. So that avoids a 6-period stipend and also allows us to get them, so, which brings down the study hall numbers overall. What other questions can I answer?
The amount of work that had to go into this was probably incredible, so, thank you.
Well, thank you to Fran and Terry for leading a lot of that work and working with Chris Ebel to figure out the math and the logistics of it and everything, so. I taught social studies, so math is not my thing.
Josh?
Thank you.
Thank you. You want me to leave this?
Oh, no, not about that.
Next informational item.
District donations. Sure. We're looking for approval from the board to accept 2 donations, and thank you again to Gus Schmidt for coordinating these. The first was from Echo Incorporated. They donated 3 pressure washers to the vocational department and to our operational department. And the second one was from Scott Christensen with McGrath Auto Group, and he donated a John Bean wheel alignment machine to the voc department as well. So really awesome donations, and thank you again to Gus Schmidt for those.
Next up, freedom of information.
Yes, we had one FOIA request this last month from an individual by the name of Joe Sutton, and he's looking for digital copies of our district's current contracts for websites, content management systems, learning management systems, and mobile app providers. That's very similar to what we're doing with our SOPA compliance, so I think that that's kind of what that centers around, and we were able to request everything and we complied with that.
2 action items for tonight. First up, approval needed for the Johnsburg Junior High schedule for our next school year.
I'll motion to approve as presented.
Second?
Kathy Nice,
Yes.
Jim Barrett,
Yes.
Bob Close,
Yes.
Megan Michael.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next action item, we need to approve the district donation. Move to accept.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Other business, our July board meeting will be back here July 13th. And motion to go into closed session regarding the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees and the purchase or lease of real property. So,
Make a motion.
I love that.
second.
It's a big problem.
Jim Barrett,
Yes.
Kathy Nice,
Yes.
Bob Close.
Yes.
Megan Michael.
Yes.
Thanks for coming. Enjoy